Alright, so my name is Maurice Charian, and today we're going to be talking about improving large assemblies. And I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm going to first start with the agenda. So the first part of the presentation is going to be on settings and how to set some of the option settings to improve performance. Next we're going to go into some advanced selection techniques, then go into Speedpak Configuration, which is new for 2009, and show you some ways to modify your assembly structure by dissolving and creating new sub-assemblies, go into some best practices, and finish up with going over some assembly drawing performance things to show you there. Alright, so we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing to kind of have a disclaimer is some of the strategy, some of the things that you're going to see here today are going to work in your environment. Some might not work so well. So it's going to be a combination of settings and some of the techniques I'm going to show you. Some of the stuff like simplified reps, some of that you might have to do some upfront planning and work that out with everybody that's everybody that's involved here. So, and one thing is that there's no silver bullet. There's no way to have one thing work for everybody in everybody's environment. So I'll go ahead and get started with first off going into settings. So settings, some of these might be familiar to you. Some of them might be things that you haven't tried before. The big one is turning on the ability to have lightweight components as part of your assembly. Or another big one is large assembly mode, and then I'll follow up here with the image quality. So let's first talk about lightweight components. So lightweight components are a way to speed up rebuild time and also speed up the load time when you first open up an assembly. So and everybody has different ideas of what a large assembly is, but if you load up something with a couple hundred parts versus a couple thousand parts, using lightweight components might make a big difference. Lightweight components can be brought up two ways. You can change something in the settings, or you can just select something directly when you go into the File Open dialog box. And I show here on the slide under System Options, Performance is where you can turn on that automatically load components lightweight. Now the lightweight components do show up with a icon showing a little blue feather, and you might see a red feather once in a while. It means something's out of date, but a blue feather means something's in lightweight mode, which means it's going to have all the capability that you're used to, except you can see on the bottom of this slide it says things cannot be edited, or it does not show the feature tree or the features in the feature tree when you first bring it up in lightweight. That doesn't mean that you can't just click on the part and then start to actually edit it. So let me go ahead and show you that. So two ways to bring up lightweight components. So I'll start with opening. I'm going to start with opening something that's in one of our classes here. It's a scuba breathing mechanism. So here if I right click or single click on this air source, one thing you can see on the bottom of my screen here is the lightweight button. So I'll go ahead and use lightweight, and I'll go ahead and say open, and now I haven't set the settings up in my options, so this way I'm just directly picking lightweight. Now what you'll see over here is you'll see that some of these have feathers in them. Usually the one that has a red feather means something's out of date, so it needs to be updated. So the blue feathers mean that they're lightweight, and one thing you'll see right away is that it has the planes, it has some of the annotation stuff like axes, but it doesn't have the feature tree. So if I was to, that's this actual regulator body. The second I double click on this to attempt to modify it, all of a sudden it switches over from lightweight. It adds more material, or in this case it adds more data to memory, and so it adds information as it needs it. So you can see now my feature tree comes back. So lightweight is a way to speed up the loading process and also the rebuild process, so it'll rebuild quicker because it doesn't have to resolve all of the features that are in that particular part. So again, you can see the blue and you see those feathers. Now the difference between lightweight, the opposite of lightweight is resolve. So how you can resolve all these if you had to get all that information is I right click here and I can say set resolve to lightweight or set lightweight to resolve. So when I click on this, it's going to take a little time to basically, it might need to rebuild like it just said. And also what it's going to do is it's going to create the feature tree, or and it'll put all the features in for each individual part in here so I can expand them out now. And again, if you wanted to go back the other way, you can go in here and say set resolve to lightweight. So there's 4 ways a part can be, in SolidWorks. In this case, it could be 4 different states. So it could be resolved. Fully resolved is opposite of lightweight. It can be also hidden, or it can be suppressed. So those are the 4 different states. So in this case, I just made those all back to lightweight. So it does speed up rebuild time. It does speed up load time. Let me go ahead and show you that again. Now in this case, the other way to bring up lightweight components is by setting it under the system options. So here's system options, performance, automatically load components lightweight. So let me show you that. So under tools, options is one way to get to it, or some of you might be familiar with right next to the rebuild button is options here too. So if I go into tools, options, system options, performance, here is automatically load components lightweight. So there's lots of settings here. The one that you want to also be aware of is you want to leave this always resolve sub-assemblies checked off. There's some other settings like check if things are out of date. Here, resolve lightweight components. And usually here, rebuild on assembly, rebuild on load. This is something that you may have to try out, but you might, if you know you don't want to rebuild when it first loads up, then you can always set that here too. Lots of different settings, and we'll just go ahead and just focus in on this one for here. So automatically load components lightweight. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now I go ahead and bring up this assembly again. What I'll see is when I go to open, the second I pick on here, that lightweight button is checked off. The other way I can tell is that if I already had opened this up once and I just double click on it, it's going to try to bring it up in lightweight mode here. So we'll let it load up. So you can see that in this case that setting was automatically turned on. So lightweight again saves you rebuild time, saves you load time. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out to you. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the slides. So now let's go back to the slides here. Okay, so that was lightweight components. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you another setting that has to do with some display options, but also it has to do with things like auto recovery. The first thing is you can invoke large assembly mode manually. You can manually toggle a button, and I'll show you that. But you also have the ability to determine if large assembly mode starts up by a default threshold. In this case, we can set this, the default is 500. We can set this to less in our case, so I can show you some examples. So you have 4 options. You have, if you want the large assembly mode to save and auto recover info file, which a lot of people probably don't have a lot of success using auto recover, so that wouldn't be probably a big deal. But the other ones are, do you want to show planes, axes, sketches, curves, and to speed up your performance. You might suffer a little bit by turning that off and basically give up one thing to get more performance. Here's another big one here, display edges in shaded mode. Now, just so you know, the fastest display state is shaded, not shaded with edges, but shaded. So you can see here, I mentioned it here. So shaded mode will take over if you had shaded with edges, shaded showing edges there. Let me go ahead and, before I go back to SolidWorks, let me just explain that again. So the display style does affect the performance. Shaded is the fastest video display style or display mode in SolidWorks. And once again, large assembly mode will push it over to shaded versus shaded with edges. Hidden line visible is the slowest video display style. And then display style performance also applies to assembly drawings. And if I have a little bit of time at the end, I'll show you that. So let's go over large assembly mode next. So I'll go ahead and I'll close this one out. Now, under tools, options, how you turn on large assembly mode is you go into underneath performance, the next one down is assemblies. And you can see that here is large assembly mode. Now I had triggered this to be, in this case, 3 components, which is a little bit too low of a threshold. So this is going to set, if it's a 501 part assembly, then it turns on this large assembly mode automatically. Too high so it doesn't invoke it. So you can see all these settings are configurable. The 2 big ones that you'll see right off the bat are these ones for display and showing all the planes and axis and stuff like that. So in this case, I'm going to turn them all on. So, and this is something that you can experiment with. Once again, some of these things you may not be able to live with, so you might have a combination of these 2 or 4. So I'll go ahead and say OK. Now, how this works is I go to File, Open, and the trick with this is don't double click here until you look at the options down here. Now on XP, some of these display options are going to be a little bit different. You might see them up in the top right-hand corner on some of this stuff, but this is a Vista computer here, Vista OS. So here you can see large assembly mode, and you can see that it invokes that lightweight component part of it. So that's something that you could toggle on and off, but you can see how lightweight gets turned on with large assembly mode. So I'm going to go ahead and say open, and now what it's going to do is it's going to invoke this large assembly mode. It will help to speed up some of the process here under tools. You can see that large assembly button is was pushed in. So you can see when that large assembly button is turned on, the biggest thing you'll notice is that shaded goes, and I just forced it. So here, when I go large assembly mode, you can see the shaded edges go away and it goes to shaded. And then the other thing you'll notice right away is that hide all types is closed out here. It says basically all these are closed and the hide all types is checked out. So you can toggle in and out of this mode here directly. Tools, large assembly mode. You can see you can toggle that on. So you can come in here and you can turn back on things like your planes and whatever you need to do here. And you can go to different display styles. And then if you wanted to turn that back on, these are quick fixes here. These are things that you can do right away. And this might be good enough for you to bring up a big assembly on a computer that doesn't have a lot of RAM or a lot of resources. So that's one of the other things I wanted to show you there. Now let's go ahead and move on. So I'll go back to my slides. And now the other thing to show you here is image settings. So I'll just quickly point to this one. Your display, and there's 2 slider bars when you go under Tools, Options, Document Properties, Image Quality. You want to keep the resolution as low as possible if you're really trying to squeeze out as much performance out of your computer as you can. But now you know that when you go to this side, you'll see that this circle turns into a hexagon. So you want to keep it, where it's something that you can live with. Now, if you needed to do a presentation or needed to show something to a client or your boss or some end user, you would take the slider and actually drag it way over here, and you'll see definitely a performance hit when you do shade and spin. So this top is going to be shaded and draft quality, hidden line removes, hidden line visible. Down here it's for the high quality hidden line visible resolution. So this bottom slider probably will affect your drawings performance, and the top one's going to be more on your parts and assemblies. So let me show you that one. So again, this is going to be under Tools, Options, and now I'm going to go into, in this case, Document Properties, and here's Image Quality. Now, sometimes when people go into here, this thing is grayed out and they can't move it around, and we get calls on that. Now you go ahead and say Apply to all reference part documents. So anything that's open is going to have this affected. And you can see as the slider goes over to here, you can see it turns into a hexagon. If I go all the way over to here, you can see it turns into a circle, and it does warn you that you're going to really tax your graphics card. So that's something you want to find the fine medium point. And so it's going to be somewhere here. You can see it slowly starting to turn into a hexagon. So it's going to be something that you'll have to experiment with again. But you can see that these are things that do affect your performance right away. So that's something I wanted to point out. Now I'll go back to the slides. Let's see if there's any questions so far. Alright, so now there's no questions yet. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my slides here. So the next thing I want to show you is something that's pretty powerful, and some of you might have tried this before. It's called Quick View and Selective Open. And what this does is it gives you the ability to open selected components without having to bring the whole assembly up. So that's something that might really save you some time, because you might have to bring up an assembly and only work on one sub assembly, or one side of the components or something like that, to where you don't need the whole thing. There's two ways to work this. You can actually use selected components or all components displayed. So in this case, I can look at hidden components and make them not load into memory, and I'll show you how it creates a new display state. And a display state, if you haven't used them before, is like a visual configuration. So now here it says after making modifications to the assembly, you can actually, if you did turn on and off some more components, you can actually unload those from memory. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that right now. And so this one is called Quick View Selective Open. This is going to be one of those things that will quickly open up your assembly. So I'll go back into SolidWorks. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to open up a different assembly now. And this assembly is, one from one of our training courses, in this case Advanced Assembly Modeling. And so this is a barbecue assembly. Now what you want to know is that you can see all these settings down here, and there's all these options that most people don't pay attention to, and this is a pretty powerful one. Here is Quick View Selective Open, and so once I click on this, it's going to show my assembly very quickly. It doesn't actually load it all the way into RAM. So it goes in here and it opens this thing up very fast, but it's a little deceptive. It's actually not fully loaded in RAM, which is okay because I can at least look at it. Now, sometimes people use this if they have trouble bringing up an assembly, either because of resources or the assembly doesn't come up. So you can actually bring this up and suppress things enough to where the assembly still comes up. So here you have two options: selected components, and you also have all components displayed. Now this is really cool because you can actually do, if I click on this, I can see all components displayed. I have all this stuff open right now. But here is something called the Advanced Select. Most people don't probably use this button up here. It's right next to the rebuild. If I click on this, I can say to, in this case, I'm going to select the toolbox parts, and it's going to find the toolbox parts, and you can see they're highlighting in green on my screen. I can go ahead and right click, hide those components. Now I just hid those. I still haven't opened this assembly up in RAM yet, so now I can say show me, open everything that is displayed, So that means in this case, turn off all these fasteners and only show me what the main part of the assembly minus the fastener. So go ahead and say open. And so you'll see it's gonna open up basically a subset of my assembly minus the fasteners. It's asking me here, in this case it's telling me you have some hidden components. There's going to be a delay when you first try to show those components. So it's just a warning. It's just giving me a message, giving me a heads up. So now what happened here is now the assembly has all these components, in this case the fasteners, hidden. And let me show you what it did. It did make a new display state. I'm going to just toggle back and forth between the assembly to get the display states to wake up here. They sometimes don't show. So here you can see the components. I'll zoom in here again. So you can see I have a display state down here, and I'm going to rename this one. And this one I'm going to call it here no hardware. No hardware, no fasteners, something like that that makes sense. So now it created a display state, which you can see I'm in the configuration tab. This is a graphical configuration is a quick way to explain display states. So in this case, it's not you're suppressing components, you're actually hiding them. So here is the default display state, so you can see those fasteners, and then here is the no hardware display state. So that automatically created that. Here you can see the fasteners again here when I go to that display state. So this is a quick way to show these fasteners on and off, and this is a quick way to actually bring up your assembly and not have to actually load up the whole thing. So again, where that was is it was under open, and here is quick view here. So now the next step is going to be slides here. So the next thing I'm going to show you is Speedpak. I'm going to show you a Speedpak configuration. So Speedpak configurations are new for 2009. They have added a little bit more functionality in 2010. And a Speedpak configuration is a special configuration which you can think of it as a simplified version of, in this case I'm going to show you an assembly. And it's going to still maintain its references, so if you mated things to it, the mates don't get broken, you don't get errors and warnings and stuff on your mates. And you have two ways you can simplify these configurations, either by face or by bodies, to include or to leave out. So a Speedpak configuration has a special little icon. I try to blow it up a little bit on my slide so you can see it. It shows an icon with it looks like it's sliding across the screen there. And so a Speedpak configuration is something that's going to help free up a little bit of memory. It'll load a little quicker because it doesn't have to load all the information. So now the next thing is what they added with 2010 is, and this is still a work in progress on the Speedpak, and one of the limitations before was that once you have a Speedpak configuration in your assembly, you couldn't have other Speedpak configurations in other sub-assemblies. So now that's been all fixed. So let me go ahead and show you that. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same barbecue assembly here. I'm going to go back to the full assembly here. And so I have a couple different configs. And this one has, instead of just the planks, it actually has some burners. I'm going to show you a couple different things here. One little trick that you might not know is when you right click, you can actually say select a sub-assembly, and it's going to have a window open up, and it has these different things that I might have been trying to pick. In this case I have the side table shelf burner, and then I have another sub-assembly, and I can right click on this, and I just want to show you the component properties. Right now I don't have any configs except for the default one. So how I got to there again was I selected this inside insert with the burners on here. So if I go to select subassembly, I'll right click and I'm going to go ahead and open up this assembly. Now I'm going to open this up in its own window. Here is my subassembly. In this case, it's got about 10 or so parts. You can see it showed up in lightweight because of my options. Now I'm going to go ahead and go over to the configuration manager, and this is where I'm going to add the Speedpak configuration. It's not that much, there's not that much magic, or there's not much difference on the interface. I'll show you the selections here in a minute. That's the only difference that you'll see. I'll say, here's add configuration. The next one down is add Speedpak. So once I add a Speedpak, you have different settings, and some of these, I know that there's still, some of these things are, getting ironed out. There's a way to use the slider bars to pick faces and bodies. I'm just going to manually pick them. So here's faces to include, here's bodies to include. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dummy down this and basically simplify this assembly to only pick a few selectable faces for mating purposes. So I want people to still be able to mate to this assembly or sub-assembly, but I don't want to have all the overhead of all the features to be having to be during rebuild, have it be, all the features be resolved and stuff like that. So I have two options here, faces to include and bodies to include. So I'll just go ahead and go with faces, and I'll go ahead and pick. In this case, I'm going to pick, 3 or 4 faces. So I'm basically giving people the option to mate to these faces here. I'll just put in here, I got 5 faces. So as soon as I say okay, this is where you'll see, and some people kind of get blown away when they first see this. You can see that now this is what the Speedpak looks like. It basically turns us into 5 selectable faces. So there's 2 configs here. Here's the default one. So that's the default one. And here's that Speedpak one. And you can see that when I go back to the feature tree on the Speedpak, there's not much in here. It's just basically those components. I'll go back to the assembly. Here's that same trick I did before. I'm going to say select subassembly, and now here on the bottom is double range burner. I'm going to right click on it, and I showed you this before, the component properties. If you haven't gone into this window much, component properties has a lot of good things. First off, the one I'm going to change is I'm going to go ahead and go to that Speedpak configuration, and if you ever have a subassembly that has movement and motion and hinges and stuff that should be able to move, and it doesn't move when you bring it into another assembly, it probably took it from a flexible assembly to what they call a rigid subassembly. So that might be something that you have to change too. So I changed it over to a default Speedpak. And so the next thing I'm going to show is once I turn that configuration on, then you'll see that now when I move my mouse over it, basically dummy that down to, in this case, those selectable faces. I'm going to go ahead and hide this component here so you can see this better. So now you can see those 5 faces that I picked are now the only thing that you can select. So now if I want to mate, I can pick that face there and I can mate to it and mate something else to it, so you get the idea. So this is a way to simplify your assembly, in this case your sub-assembly. Now we're going to start getting to some real good stuff. I think that some of you will really think is pretty good. So I'm going to show you something called Simplified Configurations, and then also use a tool called Advanced Open. Now when we talk about some of these techniques and some of the things I'm showing you, settings are easy to turn on and off. Some of these things I'm going to show you now in the simplified configuration, you might have to do a little bit of planning, and if you're working with multiple people in your office, you might have to, get this stuff straight on, what do you want to call your configurations. In this case, we're going to call it a simplified configuration. And that simplified config is going to have, in this case, some of the detailed features turned on. Small holes, fillets, chamfers, have those things turned off, because those will help. If they're turned off, first load up your model, it'll load faster and rebuild faster. So simplified configs can be created manually, or there's a simplify command that's available under tools, find, modify. It is a utility, so it is going to be something that's available for people that have Pro and Premium, but I'll show you the manual way to do it too. So fillets and chamfers are the easiest features to suppress. And now when you're suppressing things, you want to be careful because you don't want to suppress things that are going to be that are going to affect mates. And then also we mentioned here in my slides, you know, if you're going to suppress things, don't suppress things that you might need for interference detection. So that's something to look at too. So again, on the bottom, avoid mating faces and features that will be suppressed because you don't want your mates to fail. Alright. So, and I'll come back to the slides here in a minute. So now I'm going to go ahead and bring up a different assembly. Okay, I did have a question about Speedpak. So it's going to, the Speedpak, the question is, you know, what benefit do you get by using Speedpak? Is it use less system resources and RAM? So think of it like this, is Speedpak is going to be doing about the same kind of thing as this simplified rep that I'm going to make here, is you have less information that has to be processed. So whenever you rebuild your assembly, if it has less features to resolve, that's going to make it faster. And also, if there's less information that has to be loaded, it obviously saves some resources and RAM. So it gives you the rebuild and the reload efficiency there, so it does help you on both sides of that. So that's a good question. So Speedpak will do the same as what I'm going to show you here right now with the simplified reps. Alright, so alright, so here's my assembly, and what I want to show you here is that there's two methods on using this, and what I'm going to show you is I'll just go ahead and show you the manual way of doing this first. And so this part here, the top part and this bottom part, I'll go ahead and make some simplified configurations manually, so you can see that if you don't have premium or professional, you're not stuck, you can still do this. So I'm going to go ahead and open this part. So this part here has a couple fillets, or in this case some chamfers. These chamfers, in this case, the only gotcha is I just have to make sure they're not, you know, something's not mated to it. So this would be one of those things where you'd have to, you know, test it out and make sure it's going to work okay for you. And that would be something that you, if you're working with other people, you tell them, you know, make sure that everybody's on the same page and you're not actually, you know, mating things to fillets and chamfers and faces, stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a configuration called Simplified. And I think it's not case sensitive, so you can have an uppercase S or not. So I'm going to make a simplified config. Now, this is going to be something that, again, if you are working with the core version of SOLIDWORKS, you might have to manually do this. So I just made a simplified config of this part. I just took the chamfers out. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'll go back to the assembly. And this other part's a little more exciting. I'll go ahead and open up this one. Now this one has a bunch of fillets and some small holes. Make a simplified config of this one. Make sure I spell it right here, simplified. So I'm going to make sure I'm in that simplified one, and I'm going to go ahead and shift select all these and suppress those. And maybe what I'll do is I'll also suppress this small hole here. Now this other holes, maybe I could put those into this config too. So this is what this looks like now. So I have the default config and the simplified config. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to go back to the assembly, and you can see done anything here yet to affect those. I can make a config right now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close this out, close all these parts out, and then open them up again. I'm going to go back to the slides for a second so you can see this. Okay, so I want to go to this other slide because this is where you can actually use this advanced open. So I just made two simplified representations of those two parts with simplified configs, and you can name them something else too if you wanted to. Now there is this advanced open button, and this advanced open button is going to search the whole assembly, and anytime it finds a part that has a configuration name, in this case simplified, it's going to bring that up and use that one. So you can see that this would definitely help with load time and not using up so much RAM, because if it doesn't have to resolve those extra features, it's going to load it up quicker. So, and you can see that, I'll go ahead and show you this. Let's go back to so now when I go back into SOLIDWORKS, I'm going to say open, file open, and now what I have to do is, the biggest gotcha with everything is just don't double click on the assembly. Click on it once, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off large assembly mode. And if I go over to advanced here, that's the trick here. If you double clicked on this, you wouldn't get to that advanced button. So now if you're using XP and XP versus Vista and Windows 7, that advanced button is going to show up over here in a different spot. It's going to show up in the upper right hand corner. So just be aware it's in a different location. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Now here's where the magic happens. Now you can see this window came up. The assembly didn't come up. It's asking me, what do you want to do here? And so the magic button is this one down here, use specified configuration. And I can type in whatever I want. I don't have to use that one, but in this case, simplified is the one I'm going to use here. So you can type in something else. You can name it whatever you'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And now you can see that this part came in without all the two chamfers, and this part over here came in without those additional features here. So what I can do is, if I wanted to actually show those, I just go over to component property, and I can always bring it back. And the same with this one, go to component properties and bring back the default one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an automated way of doing this. And so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll just get rid of that one here and save this part, so I can go back to where it didn't have a simplified config here. And same thing with this part. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. And save that one. Close that one. And save this one and close this. So now I'm going to show you the automated way of doing this. Now the automated way of doing this is, I'll close this all together. Let's say, first thing is, this is available on, if you had utilities available, and utilities is a button that's going to be, we're going to use this for the simplified command. Now this is only going to be available for people with premium and professional. So I wanted to show you the manual way beforehand so that everybody has the same capability available to them. Now in this case, this is an automated tool, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK here. And OK, so now I'm going to go ahead and open this assembly up, and I'm just going to open it up normal methods. I can load it up lightweight, large assembly mode. Now I turned on that utility under add-ins. I turned on the SOLIDWORKS utility add-in. Now there's a tool under find modify. Now it's grayed out, so this is one time where I am going to have to get out of lightweight mode. And again, how to do that is I'm going to right click here and say set lightweight to, in this case, to resolved. So it's going to it'll take a few seconds here to switch over. Now this is a small assembly. Now when you do something like that with a large larger assembly, this might take 20 seconds or 5 minutes, depending on how many components we're talking about here. So now the next thing I wanted to show is that now once I go into Tools, Find Modify, here's this Simplify command. Now what's nice is I can actually do this at the assembly level. And so the first thing is what can you do with this Simplify? You can simplify the components based on features or by volume. And here's this button, and I'll slow down here. Ignore features affecting assembly mates. So it has some intelligence. It's going to try to pick up on any faces or features that have been used to make your mates here, so it doesn't blow up the mates. I'm going to go ahead and say okay. The simplification factor, 1 is the highest, 0.1 or 0.01 is the lowest. So you can make this thing go super simple, or just have it simplify a small amount of things. So I'm going to hit the Find Now button, and it's going to find, in this case, I had selected chamfers, fillets, holes, extrudes. If you're worried about some mate problems, you can turn off extrudes or holes. Now what it did is it found 60 features. If I had this button checked off, it would have found, I think, 80 or more, depending, obviously. In this case, I have tried it without it. I think there was about another 20 or 30 more, features. So these are not just for one part. These are for multiple parts. Now down here on the bottom of my screen here, you would see this on your screen. I have a lower resolution here. So here's the magic button here. So this is going to create derived configs, and in this case it goes simplified 1, simplify underscore 1, 2, 3, whatever you haven't used yet. So I'm going to name this simplify create derived configurations. It's going to create a derived configuration at the assembly level, and it'll go dig down into every part and add this. So that's where the magic is here. I'm going to go ahead and say all the components. I'm going to suppress them all, and it's going to ask me, do I want to set it for only the new config or for all the configs? I'm just going to go ahead and say just modify this for just the new config. Now what it's doing is it's going to create, and I have to get out of this window first to show you, so I'll go ahead and close it out. So it's going to create a simplified configuration in every single part that it modified, and it also here under the configuration manager created a derived config. So derived means that it's a child of the default one. So when I click on this, you'll see it took me a second to wake up here. Here's the default, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you guys can see this better. So now you can see I have a simplified config and I have a default config. So when you first open up your assemblies, you can tell it to bring up the simplified configuration. So that is a huge resource saver, time saver, because if you don't have to resolve all these components, individual little features and faces here when it's in a simplified rep, you can see that it can really speed up time here. So once again, the trick was to use this tools, find, modify, simplify. That's the automated way of doing this. You can do this at the part level too. And then what it does is you can just select that to actually create that derived config. Alright, so this is something that some of you might already know, and we do get some calls on how to save parts or save assemblies as parts. Now the biggest thing to think about is if you have some assemblies or sub-assemblies that are going to be off the shelf or purchased or vendor assemblies, things that you don't have any control over, that you're not going to modify, and the key word is not modify. If you know you're not going to modify something, you can actually save an assembly as a part to save some time. And in this case, you have some different options. So how you save an assembly as a part is you go File, Save As, and then you just change the file type to part. There are 3 types of part files. You can create an exterior faces, exterior components, or all components. Now just note that when in doubt, I would probably just use the all components one. If you know there are a bunch of internal parts and a lot of little guts that go inside, say a transmission or something like that, and you were only worried about the outside faces, that exterior button or exterior components would be the way to go there. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into SOLIDWORKS, and I don't really have a particular example here, so I'll just use this one right here. So all I have to do is, this is an assembly, so I'm in the compound vice assembly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go File, Save As, and instead of going Save as type, I can just go ahead and say Save as a part, and I'm going to grab all the components. I'll say all components, and in this case, maybe let's put it on the desktop, and I'll just go. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. You can see I have those different options: exterior face, exterior components, and all components. Now I would only do this step if I knew I absolutely wasn't going to modify this, because you don't want to have multiple versions of these different sub-assemblies and these simplified versions of them as a part. So once again, I got there by going File, Save As, and I picked Part. So I'll say this is all components. In this case, I'll save it into a millimeter template. I have my templates so that they prompt me. So I'll go ahead and save this out. I'm going to go ahead and close this model out. And now, if I went to open this model, it is now on my desktop. And here it is. And it's going to look the same. I can turn on feature recognition. That's one of the utilities. I'll go ahead and say no. Now the difference between what we were just looking at, this is now a part. And if I look up here, you can see it says here it is an SLD-PRT file. So now the only difference between this and what I had up here before is that these are all solid bodies now. These are bodies, and each component came in as a body. And the feature tree, there's no feature tree now. So this is almost like saving out a part as an IGES or a step file. You're dumbing down the model, which will speed up rebuild time and things like that. Okay, so there's a question. His question, Mike was asking about on that auto simplify. How does that affect other important features? So one of the buttons there was checking to see. Let me go back to the tools here. Let me bring up a different assembly. So his question was about the auto simplify. Back up that assembly so I can answer his question. So the question again was, when you're using this find, modify, simplify here, and resolve all these. So the question was about this simplify tool. Now, from my first-hand knowledge, this thing is pretty good. There might be some cases where when you say ignore features affecting assembly mates, it should find, in his case, he's asking, well, what if you did, mate to a chamfer? Well, in this case, you can say ignore features by affecting assembly mates, or if you know there's some bad practice going on, you could actually say, well, you know what, don't check and don't try to simplify these chamfers. So you can always just turn that off. So you can just say, you know what, just check for fillets. That would be a pretty safe one. And you can see these other options here. So, if I was real concerned, maybe turn off chamfers, holes. A lot of people go concentric mates to holes, so you can always just leave that one off. So it might just be fillets, but if you're feeling pretty good about that, you can actually turn them all on, and then you also have the simplification factor. So the smaller you go with this, and let's see here, simplification factor, in both cases volume, and it does give you a little bit of a heads up on what you're looking for. You can always knock this down so it only looks for things with smaller volume, or it looks for features that aren't going to affected so much. So that's a good question. So I'd say between that and maybe turning off chamfers, I think that would be a safe way to keep you out of trouble. So once again, another good question. Alright, so now let me go back here. So now the next one we want to go into is component patterns. Component patterns. So I'm going to show you a couple different patterns. Now with component patterns, you have some feature patterns that show up at the part level. Why not tie into that existing intelligence that you helped put in your 50 holes, and you put them in pretty quickly. Why not use that same pattern to put in the block washers and the flat washers and fasteners all into that same pattern? So you can tie components to patterns that were created at the part level. And so I have a cool looking little engine here, and I'll show you these little gold pieces here in a minute on how to make a pattern of that. So what's nice about the feature driven component patterns, it's going to use less resource because it doesn't have to crunch the numbers so much. And then you can, with these patterns, you can skip instances, and you also have the ability to dissolve patterns and be able to modify those pieces if you don't like the way they're made, so you can actually turn on and off some of these component features. So let me go ahead and show you this. So I'm going to go back into SolidWorks. So let me go ahead and show you some of this. And I'll start with a simple example of component patterns. Alright. So I'm going to start with a very simple example. This is one of the exercises from our advanced assembly book. And so if I open up this part has two patterns in it. It has a very simple, just one big rectangular hole pattern, and then the more exciting pattern is the one that goes all the way across. Now this pattern, I'm actually going to edit it so you can see what it looks like. Under here, instances to skip, you can see that it did skip some of the instances, so we can tie right into that and piggyback right on that same pattern here at the assembly level. So this is just a three-piece assembly. Now if I go into assembly, here's linear component pattern here. Now here the one that we're going to use is feature driven pattern. So we're going to tie into the actual assembly components are going to be tied into the part pattern. So I click on this, and the interface is pretty easy. So we're going to pick the component we're going to pattern, and then we just say driving feature. So think of this as driving pattern. Which pattern am I going to tie into? So if I pick maybe this face here, you can see that it quickly populates it, and you guys should be able to see that on your screen there. You can see it puts all the little yellow previews. Instances to skip. I can go back and skip a few of these if I want to. So you can see I quickly put that pattern in. So it doesn't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to have this do all this extra geometry crunching and number crunching and stuff like that. So it already knows from the part level pattern what's going on here. So I'm going to show you one more pattern here. So I'll pattern this one. This is a real simple one. But again, I go to linear feature driven component pattern. So I'm going to pattern this one. And my driving feature, think of this as your driving pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And now you can see I just put that other one in there. Now, I can always go back and modify the part, and for time purposes I won't show you this, but if you modify the part pattern, the components would go with it. Here, so what I want to show you is I'll show you a more exciting pattern. I'll show you these little gold pieces here. I'll show you how to quickly pattern that. So I'm going to go ahead and bring back up SolidWorks. I'm going to open up my version of this little engine here. So here I have these two gold pieces, and this second one here was actually a mirror of the first one. So here's how quickly I can pattern this. I go into linear pattern, feature driven component pattern. I'll go ahead and just start from scratch. I want to pattern this one, and this one that was actually mirrored, I go into my driving feature, and it's going to be one of these pattern pieces. So all I have to do is just pick on one of these, and you can see that it actually populated that and put those in there. So that's a pattern of a mirrored component and the original parent component. So let me show you that one again. I go into linear component, feature-driven component pattern. I pick my two components that I want to pattern. My driving feature, and if I wanted to, I could pick it off the feature tree too. In this case, I know it's one of these. It's the circular pattern here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and you can see that it very quickly patterns that. Now I think we're running out of time, so I know that some of you have to go. That's fine. Now if you want to stick around, I probably have about another 5 minutes worth of material. And so for those of you that have already attended, thank you. And I'm going to keep going and answer some more questions here. So the next thing I want to show you is modifying assembly structure. Now, what you want to know, big picture stuff, is SolidWorks likes to work with sub-assemblies, not just a bunch of top-level components. It would rather work with sub-assemblies because it will actually rebuild quicker and there's a little bit less mate processing it has to do. So you can create a sub-assembly by just using this form new sub-assembly here. I'll show you that. You can dissolve a sub-assembly and basically restructure your whole assembly from the top down. Virtual component is something that's new where you can actually break a link to an external file. Multiple sub-assemblies should be used in place of multiple top-level component parts. For one reason, it saves all the time of you having to recreate a bunch of mates, but also it basically takes a sub-assembly, and when it processes it, it turns it into a fixed entity where it just fixes it in place. It doesn't solve all those mates. It just puts it into place. It just fixes it, and it doesn't have to redo all those mates. If you turn a sub-assembly from rigid to flexible, then it will solve those mates. But if it's just a standard rigid sub-assembly, it's not going to spend all that time recreating those mates, or in this case, resolving those mates. Another good reason why you want to break down large assemblies into smaller sub-assemblies is you might have multiple people on a project working in SolidWorks. If you break it down into smaller sub-assemblies, you give those people the ability to bring up those assemblies and work on them at the same time. So let me go ahead and show you some of that. So I'll open up this one. Now this one here, it has a bunch of, in this case, moving components I wanted to point out to you. Now one thing about this, under Tools, you can see there's something called Assembly Expert. The other one you can see there, you can try out is new, is this Assembly Visualization. So Assembly Expert, it's going to tell you how many mates there are. It's going to tell me, in this case, the top level mates, which you want to keep that number now. Number of top level components is 21. You want to keep those numbers now. So how you can affect the structure of this sub-assembly is, I'll just highlight one of these. This is a tool holder. I can go ahead and right click, and I can say, in this case, I'll move down and say form new sub-assembly here. So form new sub-assembly here, and now when I do that, I'll go ahead and, in this case, it named it. I'll go ahead and I can rename this. So I'll hit F2. Maybe I'll call it the top sub-assembly. Now what it will do is it's going to say top caret compound vice. So now I made that new assembly, and now I can go ahead and add some more pieces to it. So I can add, in this case, maybe I'll add the upper compound to it. Maybe I'll put the upper plate in there. And you can see the icon changes, so I can actually drag those in there. And then here's the other one I want to put in here. So for time purposes, I'll just put a couple more in here. So now I just made a sub-assembly. And now if I go into here, I can open this up. And now here is my sub-assembly. I can keep working on it. And now the one thing it did do is it was rotating, and now I can't rotate it anymore. So what you can do, and I can't really show you the icon, but you'll see it change here. I can go into component properties and I can set that to flexible. And now I can go back and now rotate it around again like I did before. And now to go backwards, if you did have to dissolve the sub-assembly, you can go right click on here. Here's dissolve sub-assembly. And now it says, do you want to save that top sub-assembly before you decompose it? So I'll go ahead and say, no, don't save it. So now I go back into my assembly here, and now you can see there's no subs here. So that's something I wanted to show you. Last couple things to show you is here, if you click on a part, here is the way to make a part virtual. So what I'll show you here is just talking about best practices. Some of these best practices apply to large assemblies when you're talking about performance. Some of this is just best practices in general. These are geared more towards performance. So break down your large assemblies into sub-assemblies to make it so it has to do less top-level mate calculations and solving. That's a big thing to think about. So, and when you know you're going to use components over and over again, just like if you had a fastener with a lock washer and a flat washer, make a sub-assembly out of that, because then you don't have to recreate those internal mates. Break down those large sub-assemblies so that you have the multi-user environment that we were just talking about. Make simplified configurations, and I showed you a couple of ways of doing that, of the top level assembly, because you can actually load those up. You don't have to load the whole assembly up. You don't have to load that simplified version of it for space constraints. Last couple things are also part configuration. Suppress those details. One thing that I've learned over the years is I always show people how to make helical threads and make springs, and then 2 days later they're talking about their hardware being slow and their performance going down. So you want to keep the suppression, suppress the helical threads. Don't show springs unless you have to. Those are things that are really going to affect your performance. Use component patterns. It's more efficient for placing those components, and it's less processing. One of the other tech support guys really was harping on is resolve all feature made errors. Whenever you see made errors or warnings, fix those right away. If there's any broken references, it's going to be a performance hit, because SolidWorks will try to find those missing references. And so those are things that you want to avoid. And then one other thing one of the tech guys told me is don't model off-the-shelf parts. Go ahead and log into 3D Content Central. You can log in for free. There's a lot of different things on there, motors and servos, and a lot of different things you can get, so you don't have to build those from scratch. All right, so I think we're winding it up here. So we're almost done with the presentation here today. So a couple last things to go over were assembly drawing performance. One of the things that comes up is that the display shaded without edges showing is going to help performance-wise on a drawing, just like it would when you're looking at an assembly in the assembly mode. Also, when you're working in an assembly, know that you should probably bring in one view at a time, detail it out as best you can, and then move on to the next view. And then there's another option for hiding components behind a plane, which will basically remove things behind the plane so it doesn't have to do the processing of what those edges would look like hidden and things like that. And along the same lines, there is also a automatically hide components on view creation setting, which will leave out the internal guts of the components. In this case, I'm going to show you a flashlight where the batteries don't show up. So that would just save a little bit of computational power, where it doesn't have to actually figure out those edges and things that it wouldn't show anyway. And then one last one is more of a real drastic one, is where if you're really having trouble with your graphics graphics and you're just really slow on even moving views around, you can turn off the showing of the contents when you move a view from one place to another. It'll just show the box of the view and not the actual inside of it. So some of these are going to be a little drastic for some of you with older computers or laptops, and they're kind of struggling with some of these assemblies you're working with. Some of this stuff might really help you out. Alright, so I'll go ahead and show you here on SolidWorks how this works. So I'm going to bring up this flashlight, and this flashlight, some of you might have seen this if you've taken the Intro Essentials class or the drawing class. And so you can see that there are, in this case, there are some batteries in here. There's also the light bulb in here, and there's the reflector inside here. So there are some internal components. So when I first make a new assembly, I'll go to one of the settings so you can see what that is. So under Tools, Options, under Drawings here, there's one where it says Automatically Hide Components on View Creation. So that's one that I'll turn on. And then the other one is Show Contents While Dragging Drawing View. Again, that's another one that is going to be probably a little extreme. Some of you might not like that, so it would be just a rare case where you're really having a tough time with moving views around and it really being slow. So depends on your hardware, depends on how big your assembly is. But this automatically hide components on view creation is one that I think that most people would use, regardless of your hardware or any other reason not to, because it does save a little bit of computer power, not having to figure out the hidden lines and things that are not going to be shown anyway. So I'll go ahead and say OK to those two. So we go ahead and make a new drawing here. So I'll make a B-size drawing this time. I'll scale this up so you can see this a little bit better. The scale came in at 1/2. I'll go 1:1 on here. So now the first question is, what did that one setting do? So that one setting, it came in here and it was to not create hidden components or show the hidden components that you're not going to be able to see anyway, in this case the batteries and some other things. So if I go into Hide Show Components, you can see that automatically it left out the batteries, it left out one of the locks, the light bulb, the reflector, the swivel, and so that was on this particular view. Let me show you in this one. So this view, if I make this one shaded, you'll be able to see this better. You can see that the light bulb is gone there, and so that's what was taken out, in this case the batteries. So if I go into a hidden line visible, you can see that the light bulb is gone, the batteries are gone here, and so that's what that did. And then the other setting is under Tools, Options, Drawings, Show Contents While Dragging Drawing View. If I uncheck that, then you can see now that it just shows the box and not the actual inside of it. Now again, that one might be one that is just, an extreme measure, but that would be one that sometimes maybe you guys would use. And you can see that the difference here, you can see it just shows the box. The envelope is what I usually refer to as the view envelope of this. So in this case, if with that setting here under Tools, or you can get to it over here under Options. Again, that one is Drawings, Show Contents While Dragging Views, and that's the default is usually So those are a couple of the settings I wanted to show you. One last thing to mention about the drawings is that they will also work in lightweight mode too, depending on how your settings are. And so let me show you that. So I'll bring up a drawing, and this drawing here is one that I've already created, and you can see I have it automatically turning on lightweight, but if not, you can always set that. And so this will bring this up, and now the drawing will come up in lightweight too. Now it said here there's some issues with the units. Some of the units aren't matching between the drawing and the assembly or the sub-assemblies and stuff like that. So it says, do I want to resolve them? Or I can say no. I'll go ahead and say no so that you can see the drawing came up quickly. And then also here you can see that the feathers are there, so they are coming in lightweight. And if you ever had to turn that off, you can just say set lightweight to resolve, and then it will turn it back off. So again, this is a way to quickly bring up your drawing and not have to wait a long time for it to rebuild or reload. I think we're just about done here. Let me just mention a few things about the lightweight drawings here. So if you do use lightweight drawings, there are some exceptions. You saw that one thing about the units here. It says any components whose units differ from those of the drawing. It'll try it. In this case, it prompted me to change it over to fully resolved, which is the opposite of lightweight. You can see some of the other exceptions here is if there's a Weldman part, it needs to fully resolve it. Any component where the model items are imported into the drawing, that's going to make it go from lightweight to fully resolved. And then the last one here is any model that hasn't been updated into SOLIDWORKS 2009. So that's going to wrap it up for today's webcast. Thanks again for attending. My name is Maurice Cherian.